Welcome to Passive Aggressive Income. This program may contain strong language. The content may not be suitable for audiences under the age of 17. We understand many of our listeners may not agree with all of our personal viewpoints. We in no way, shape, or form mean to be offensive to anyone. Our show notes will provide all of our source material included for each episode. Now let's get passive aggressive. Welcome back to another episode of Passive Aggressive Income. Lexie is going to start us off with a really awesome topic. We're going to continue with real estate. So I'm going to hand it over to Lexie today.
Yeah, thanks, Mims. Yeah, like Min said, we are sort of as we approach our 1 year mark of the podcast, we've been talking about real estate, and that's kind of the roots of sort of how Mims and I got to know each other, and a big reason why we started the podcast. And so this week, this topic, I feel like is something that's really important for a lot of people that are struggling to buy their first home. Um, and I totally don't blame them because the market is really crazy right now, but we're going to go through some tips on buying your first home today. So first off, yeah, buying your first property can be extremely overwhelming and stressful. And so these tips are just like compiled things that I think can make the whole process a bit easier and more manageable. So to start out, the most important thing is figuring out what you want in a home. So I would suggest listing out your wants versus must-haves,
Hmm.
especially in a market right now where housing supply is pretty low. The chances of you getting every single thing you want in a house is probably unlikely. So really take the time to distinguish what is a must-have for your house. Like, do you really want a big yard? Is that something important to you if you want to have dogs? Or is it just something that's like kind of nice? Like it would be nice to have some space. So make sure you distinguish between those things.
I love that because then you really hone in on what you will be not I don't want to say settle for, but like you said, the market is so like if you don't snag it, then like right away within like the
Hmm.
first day that it's listed, then it's gone. So you really have to make sure that you can make decisions on like the fly and
Yeah.
having a list prepared of like, okay, I would love a garage but a dishwasher isn't necessary, but I would like a dishwasher. Like just being
Hmm.
clear and defined on what you absolutely need, I think going into it is the way to go.
Yeah, that's a really good point because a lot of times you have to rely on your initial gut decision. Like, do I like this place? Could I see myself living here? And just go with it because if you think about it too long, it's going to be gone.
Absolutely.
And also, I feel like having this list is something really good that you can give to your realtor so they know
Mm,
ahead of time like what kind of houses that they should be sending you in the first place. Like, what would you even
right,
consider or what's a deal breaker?
right.
And then the next tip would be to research and spend time in the different neighborhoods that you'd like to live in and definitely don't want to live in, or cities if you're looking at a broader area. When I first moved to the Twin Cities, I really had no idea what type of place I would want to live in, what neighborhoods were good, what neighborhoods were a little bit more sketchy, and really didn't have any idea of what was out there. And so I'm glad that I rented for a while and was able to check out the different neighborhoods around here and kind of drive through and take walks through the neighborhoods of houses that I was looking at because I got a feel for what it would actually be like to live here full time. And I think that's really important as someone who has traveled all over the place and
Hmm.
have visited cities that I've fallen in love with and cities that I could, don't really plan on returning to. It's important to spend the time in the place that you would potentially live in.
Yeah, and let's say you are gonna relocate and you physically can't be at, the other state or the other
Mhm.
city because of whatever the case may be. Google Maps is
Yeah.
really intuitive. So if you do like the satellite, no, not
Mhm.
satellite,
Street view.
the street view,
Yeah.
yeah. It will be like as if you were right there on the street. Obviously, you won't hear like the sounds or anything
Mhm.
like that, but like you'll be able to see how the neighborhood is structured and like what it's like if there's a homeless shelter right next to it
Right.
or if there's like a freaking mall like right next to it as well. So doing that and just researching
Hmm.
is going to be your best bet.
Yeah, exactly. Look at crime maps. And also the great thing about Google Maps too, with the Street View is you can go back in time and look at say the streetcar went through like 4 years ago and 7 years ago and 10 years ago. You can go through and see how the neighborhood is changing too and see like is it looking,
Oh,
things are getting better, is it kind of deteriorating? So you can sort of see what your neighborhood is trending too.
wow. Okay, that is really cool.
Mhm. Yeah, because I looked back at like my properties like years ago before I bought it. I was like, oh my God, that place is, ooh, it's falling apart. It's really
Right,
come a long way. Yeah,
right.
that's a good tip. Street view for sure if you can't be there in person. And then you should also be asking people that you know for recommendations on a realtor because a realtor is going to be like guiding you through this process the whole way. And if this is the first time you're buying a house, it can be just very scary and you don't know what kind of questions to ask. So if you go through someone that you trust or that your friends or family have experience with and they're like, yeah, this person is really knowledgeable, they're going to get you what you need, then that's just one less thing that you have to worry about. And also, realtors specialize in different things. So if you're looking at more of an investment property, multifamily, then a realtor who kind of just does single family homes and sticks to like really nice, wealthy neighborhoods may not be
Mm,
as educated on what you
yeah.
would need. So make sure that you are looking for someone who specializes in what you're looking for.
Yeah, that is a really, really good point. And making sure that you ask the question of how communicative they were during the whole
Right.
process is really important because I've heard from like different people, my real estate agent or my realtor like barely got back to me and I've had to like hound them to get like answers.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, I was having like the easiest transitions whenever I was looking for a next property to invest because my real estate agent was just on it every single day. I would
Mhm.
text her and it would be like in an inappropriate time and she would be like texting me back. She was amazing. And that's that sort of work ethic really, eh, people will notice that and people will talk about it.
Mhm.
So make sure that you ask that question too.
Yeah, for sure. And it'll make you feel so much more cared for in a process that's really scary when you have the right person. So,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely go off of recommendations rather than just someone you found off the internet. But if that's your only option, then just make sure you do your research.
Yeah.
And I would suggest getting a realtor right away in the process because they'll give you access to the MLS, which you will just have way more information than looking on houses on Zillow.
Yes.
Yeah, just immediately, like you're thinking of looking, make sure you have access to all of the information that's out there by going through a realtor.
And for a lot of the people that I've talked to, they don't know what the MLS is. Could you explain what that is?
Yeah, so the MLS is basically, so think of Zillow, but a bit more professional and curated for what you specifically are looking for. So it's this whole like database of houses that are listed or maybe listing soon that your realtor can go ahead and put in specific parameters like what is your budget? What are some must-haves that you want? What are things that would be nice? What neighborhoods are you looking for? And they can basically light up all of the houses that fit within your specifications. And then you can go through and look at those, and it's sort of weeding out all the other crap that you're not interested in.
Yeah, and it's way more updated than any other
Mhm.
sites. It's like when I was first before I got my realtor, I was looking off of like Zillow and I don't
Yeah.
even know what else. And there would be a house that I'm like, "Oh, that's great." And then I would like call to schedule like a tour and it was already sold. So
Yeah, exactly.
these properties are as current as they can get.
Yeah, it's kind of like real time updates as
Yeah.
much as reasonably possible, which is really helpful, especially when, like we said already, houses are going so fast.
Yeah.
So one thing that home buyers, especially first-time home buyers, are often struggling with is that it's just really fucking expensive. And so, yes, this is definitely a barrier of entry, but there are also tons of programs out there that can help make it less expensive. So some examples would be down payment assistance. And if this is your first time that you're buying a house, there's, at least in Minnesota, a first time home buyer credit that you can get. And there's like
Yes.
tax advantages and all sorts of things. So just know that you are not necessarily on your own for having to
Mhm.
pay for everything right off the bat.
Yeah, that's what I did for my first investment property. I bought it with that first time home buyers because I moved into it. So I believe that's only if you move into the
Yeah.
property.
Hmm.
And that saved me. I think that I only brought like $5,000 to the table at closing. So like that was a huge help for me. I was literally 23 years old, so it was really it made it possible for me to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And I found out about the first time home buyer credit after I bought my first house. I'm like,
Oh.
oh, that's what it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is why we do this podcast though, because so many people are like in the beginning stages and they
Mhm.
don't know this stuff
Yeah.
and they don't know that there's so many benefits and resources before you dive in. And
Mhm.
that's why we do this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I want anyone listening to this podcast to know that there are options and that you don't need to feel like this is an unreasonable goal that's just out of reach for you forever.
Exactly.
But it also is a good question to ask, is this the right time? So the market is definitely a factor, but and that's not to say that like, oh yeah, the market's really shitty right now, so you can't buy a house, because that's not right either. But it is important to ask, like, is this really a good time for me to buy? Or is this like home price and interest rate like really inflated? And could I actually rent somewhere cheaper than I would be able to buy a house? Because that's kind of a factor for like the first time, at least in mine and Mim's lives, we're seeing that rent is cheaper than buying a house. And historically, when you think like you buy a house, you're going to save money each month and it's going to be a really good financial decision for you. But at least around here in the Twin Cities, with interest rates being so high, you may spend like 1,300, 1,400 for like a two bedroom. But if you buy a house that's two bedrooms, you might be looking more like 1,900 per month for all of like for your mortgage payment and interest and all the things that you have to pay. So yeah, the market isn't the only factor to consider, but it is definitely something to ask, like, is this actually the right time?
And I think that's one thing that renters don't quite understand is that the fact that we as the landlords, we as the owners are putting way more down
Mhm.
in order to own this property. And I know a lot of them said, well, that's your problem. Like you're the one who's choosing to do that. But if there wasn't private landlords and private owners, then this would all be government housing. And if that's like what you are more wanting to gravitate towards, I guarantee it wouldn't be as what's the right word for this? It wouldn't be as pleasant, maybe, of a
Yeah.
place to live. And if you've ever lived in government housing, I think you would know what I'm referring to.
Mhm.
Um, so yes, we are choosing to make that purchase so that we can rent it out and rents are getting higher because of everything that's going on. Like 7% is astronomical, especially
Yeah.
when it was from 3 to 5. And I
Mhm.
know maybe that wasn't like the norm, but we were so used to that
Right.
that was the norm for us. And then
Mhm.
now it's like skyrocketed. It was like it's either like mid or high 7%.
Yeah.
So it's just it's crazy to be a renter and to be a homeowner or investment owner right now.
It certainly is. Yeah, and I mean that's the thing too is historically when you look at high housing prices versus high interest rates, they sort of teeter-totter against each other. When low interest rates are happening, then like house prices are going to be higher. And when high
Yes.
interest rates come up, then typically home prices go down. But that's not what we're seeing right now. Those home prices are still staying really high because the supply is just so low. So it is definitely like, yes, you are choosing to, if you're looking at an investment property, you are choosing to do this as an investment. and you need to make it work if you're going to rent it out so you're actually profiting off of it. And on the other side, if you're a renter and you're choosing to live in a place that is privately owned by like a small mom and pop realtor or home investor, then that's also your decision. And there are benefits that come to that versus like a huge apartment complex or government housing. You're going to have a landlord who is paying more attention to your specific unit because they have less of them. And so, yeah, it is just something to keep in mind either as a renter or if you're a potential investor, is that you will have to base your rents off of your own monthly payments.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of buying and crazy like home prices and everything, we can talk a little bit about different types of loans. So I won't get too in depth with this because I really want this episode to just be sort of an overall, like, here are some tips and some things to look into. But the three main types of loans that are out there are conventional. Usually this would be a 5% down payment. Even if you are an investor looking into multifamily, I believe it would be under 4 units and you plan on moving into the property, you can still get that 5% down,
Yes.
um, which is great because that wasn't the case. At least in Minnesota, it changed to, I think average was like 15%, and I ended up working out a deal to get 10% down. But yeah, 5% versus like 10 or 15, that's literally like half or a third of what you could pay like a couple years ago. And so it really is nice if you plan on moving into the place that you can put a low percentage down.
Absolutely.
And then the other type of loan would be FHA loan, which is only a 3.5% down, but they do have some other restrictions on the type of property and the condition it's in. Like if this place is falling apart, you're probably not going to be approved for an FHA loan. So that's just something to consider. But if you are looking for something that's a bit more like done and ready to go, this could be a really good option for you. And then the last loan I'll touch base on is VA loans. So this is for current military service members or veterans, and there's usually no down payment. So if you are in the military, this is a really great benefit for you.
Yeah, absolutely. They deserve it.
Yeah, they certainly do. They deserve a lot more than they're getting.
Yes.
In addition to like just what kind of loan to look for, you should really shop around for a lender. Don't just go with the first like big company that gives out mortgage loans. I would suggest looking at local credit unions. You'll typically have the most negotiating power with them compared to something a lot bigger. That is what I have found. Going with
Yes.
my first property was a bigger type of company, and then for my second property, I went with a local credit union, and they were way easier to work with. They offered a lot of different benefits, and I shopped around for a whole bunch of different places, and the credit unions by far have been just like a way better deal for mortgage loans and interest rates and all the other fees that are associated.
Yeah, absolutely. I've only dealt with credit unions. We shopped around, every type of bank, but credit
Mhm.
unions are way more flexible and way more understanding and just way more forgiving when it comes to all the money aspects to it. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's I search them up first before you go to like Chase or something like
Yeah, or
that,
like Rocket Mortgage or
or right,
anything.
yeah, something astronomically like more out there.
Mhm. Yeah, and some things that you want to be asking of your lender too is just like, so not only looking into interest rates and closing costs, origination fees, things like that, but how responsive are they? Like if you find a
Mm,
property that you're like, I'm ready to go on this, are they going to be on top of it with you? That's
yeah,
really important.
yeah,
And you can ask your realtor for recommendations too. That's what they're there for. They are a whole wealth of knowledge in addition to
yeah,
just trying to get you into a house.
yes,
So with that, you want to make sure that you're running the numbers before actually purchasing the property. So take into consideration all of the fees, things that I just mentioned, your monthly payment, and determine what you can actually afford based on your expendable income. So look at your budget, for your what you actually get paid and all the money that you're getting in each month versus how much is leaving your accounts, what expenses you have, what kind of car payments or other things, and figure out like what is reasonable for me to pay each month, and is this going to be everything I have on this house, or am I going to have a little bit of wiggle room?
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind that you will get approved for way higher than you actually should be purchasing. Like
Yes.
when I started my home like investment property journey back in 2020, my husband and I got approved for looking for a house for 500K, which is insane to me because that would have
Yeah.
been like so much, like we would have been really stretched thin with that, especially if we didn't get an investment property, especially if we just bought a house for that much. I mean, that would have been
Oh my
insane.
God. Yeah.
So yeah, just like make sure that you're not giving everything you have. And I would suggest being like well under the budget of the maximum that they're going to give you a loan for. And
Right.
then weigh the pros and cons of paying a higher percentage down payment or a lower monthly payment, and like what makes sense to you. Do you have
Mm,
like a big sum of cash that you can put down right now and like lower that monthly payment? Or you kind of like stretch a little bit thin for the down payment, but you have enough money coming in each month that you can handle a higher mortgage payment each month. So
right.
keep in mind that you do need at least 20% down to avoid paying mortgage insurance. So if you are paying less than that, if you're doing like 5% down or an FHA loan that's only 3.5% down, know that there will be an additional fee each month for mortgage insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Get pre-approved for a loan as soon as you think you might be ready. So what a pre-approval is that your lender that you've chosen will like look through all of your finances, and they'll be able to tell you like what your budget is, what you should be looking for. And then that lasts, whatever the number they give you will last for 3 months. And if you don't find a house within 3 months, you can just run your information again, and then they'll give you another pre-approval. So it's not that like big of a deal if you don't find a house within 3 months. Yeah, they'll have to run your credit score, which might be like a tiny mark, but it's not that big of a deal. And it's really important to have that done sooner rather than later, because if you do have a pre-approval, that's going to show sellers that you're actually serious about the process, you're ready to go. If you're putting an offer down and you don't have a pre-approval, then they might just go with someone else who actually has their shit together. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just kind of the truth.
Yeah,
Um,
my realtor doesn't even show houses unless you have a pre-approval because A, that's a waste of time for her.
exactly.
Um, and B, it's a waste of time for you because then you're not really in the competition of it.
Mhm.
So you just got to get pre-approved first.
Yeah, you do. That really should be the first thing. You get a realtor, you get your pre-approval, you start looking at houses. That's kind of the order.
Yeah.
And like I said before, that way you know what the maximum home price you are actually approved for a loan. So yeah, it's just one less thing in the way of when you put down an offer and you get that offer accepted. So make sure you do that right away.
Yes.
And just because this is a podcast where we talk about money, and I'm going to lecture a little bit continuously throughout this episode about smart financial decisions, I really want to iterate that you should not be spending every single dollar you have on the down payment. Because guess what? When you own a house, you are responsible for when things break, and they will. They will break unexpectedly. And so make sure that you actually have the funds to deal with any unexpected costs as they come up. If you have like $5,000 and you're like, all right, I'm ready to buy a house. I have a down payment for a small home. I'm ready to go. That's not a good financial decision, because if that's really everything you have, and especially if you're looking at investing where you're going to have tenants, you really need to make sure that you have enough money to make sure that their quality of living is good, that they don't have like a broken water heater that you can't afford to fix, that they have heat in the winter, and that you're able to maintain the quality of the house. So really just make sure that you have additional savings after you put down the down payment, and be aware that in addition to the down payment, you have all sorts of other closing costs and other fees that you'll have to pay in the process, which you may not know. So I'll list out some of those. So there's escrow fees, title insurance, appraisal fees, property taxes, attorney fees, inspector fees, all sorts of things. So know that like, yeah, you might have a down payment saved, but there's more things you're going to have to pay for right off the bat.
Yeah, and one thing that you can do is, reach out to or have your realtor reach out to the sellers and say, "Hey, I will give you, let's say the property's worth 84. I
Mhm.
will give you 86 for the purchase price if you cover closing costs." So
Yep,
that way that you don't have to bring it all to the table right then and there, and then you can pay it over time, and that could help
exactly.
with with all of the money you have to bring. Because it's not just the down payment, like Lexi said, there's so many hidden fees and just like all these things that you don't really think about that will add up when you go and sign
Mhm.
all the papers.
Yeah, I like to think of it if you're buying tickets to a concert or a festival and you're like, okay, this is the cost, and you go to check out and you realize that it's actually like 30% more, and they're like, what are all these fees for? Think of the same thing is going to happen, maybe less extreme, but the same thing is kind of going to happen when you buy a house. There's all of these unexpected fees that you need to be prepared for.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, Mims, you bring up a really good point because that's something I did want to talk about is you can talk with your agent on how to get creative about covering some of those closing costs. You can ask for like say I'm going to do a really speedy closing. Like I'm moving from an apartment where I'm just paying month to month. I can get out of here really soon versus someone else who has a house and they're selling. They may have to wait for someone to put an offer and accept their offer on their house before they can move. So that's something that is going to look good as far as when you put an offer in. And then you can ask the seller for concessions. So help with closing costs. Be like, hey, I'm doing this really speedy closing. Now you help me out and close, 1% of closing costs or cover like all of the closing costs. Or if expendable cash is something that's a little bit limited for you right off the bat. And there are a couple of things that the house needs after you go through the inspection, and they're like, oh, yeah, this needs to be fixed and this needs to be fixed. Be like, hey, how about you fix those things right off the bat. I'll pay a little bit higher on the home price as long as it appraises for that much and or say like I'll pay my closing costs, but you fix some of those things first. And then that's just kind of like a good way to negotiate and have some back and forth with the seller and show them that you are serious and you're wanting to make it work on both sides.
Right. It's supposed to be a win-win situation, not a win kind of win or win
Yeah.
lose. So definitely be like an advocate for yourself. If you think like, man, I'm bending over backwards to make this sale go through, and they're just kind of like, yeah, that's great. Um, Ask for things for yourself too, because
Mhm.
you most likely will get them. You just have
Yeah.
to ask. And if they are like, nope, not going to do it, not going to do this, and it's starting not to make sense, then maybe reevaluate, or it just never hurts to ask.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know if you don't ask, and if you don't ask, you're not going to get what you want. So it's
Hmm.
important to be vocal about it.
Hmm.
And so then this next tip that I'm going to give is definitely my own personal opinion. And I'm pretty sure Mims and I have both talked about it on the podcast, but it's really important to reiterate. And I know this also goes against what people in my lives are currently or have done themselves, but personally, I would never waive an inspection when I put an offer down
My God.
because, yeah, it's when you buy a house or when you go and look at a house for the first time, even if you've done this process a million times and you know what to look for, and you're like, yeah, I see this needs to be fixed, and I see that is an issue, you aren't an inspector and you're not going through with tools and a magnifying glass and being like, okay, these are the issues that's behind the walls or that's in the basement. You're just not a professional. And especially if maybe the homeowner knows that there's issues that are kind of like hiding that aren't obviously visible, they may go with your offer versus someone who wants to do the inspection before actually putting in accepting the offer and all of that. So just because they're like, oh, like they're not going to find this on their own. So for me, it's just really not worth it to make my offer more desirable compared to other people by waiving the inspection. And this really is your one chance before you buy the house to get familiar with all the problems you're walking into. And believe me, there will be problems, even if the house is literally brand new. There's going to be issues. So it's just something that I would really suggest not waiving to make your offer look better.
This is a man-made product, right? So, as everybody knows, people are flawed, and everything that is done is not going to be to like a perfection state. So, and especially when it's 100 years old
Yeah.
or 50 years old, and maybe you can get away with like a new build, but like I just said, it's man-made. So there's gonna be flaws, whether it's, small little cosmetics to big issues. You just never know. It could have been, people that came from a 3-day bender on Monday and they were super hungover and then they started building your freaking
Right.
house. You don't know. Um, so yes, I 100% agree with this point. I will never waive it. I don't care how many people are like, yeah, it was fine. It
Right.
was,
Turned out
there was nothing.
okay.
No, I'm never going to be sold on that boat.
No, me either. For me, it's not worth buying a house and having like major issues that I didn't know about because I just wanted it and I wanted a
Right,
house now. So I waived
right,
the inspection fee.
right.
And along with that, research the shit out of inspectors. Don't just go with whoever your realtor recommends, although they may have some really good options for you. You can use that as a starting point, and then look at Google reviews, look at Facebook, see what other people are saying about their experience, and and then get quotes from inspectors too, because in my experience, I've paid a buck ton of money on an inspector that didn't do as well as an inspector that was a bit more reasonably priced. So don't be like, oh yeah, this is a really good company and like, they're expensive, so they must be good. Just read reviews, do your research. It's important.
Yeah, like if you always have that concept of it's more expensive, then it must be like the better option. You
Hmm.
clearly don't live in the real world
Yeah.
because it's just, even when it comes to like cosmetics, you buy that $100 jar of cream that
Hmm.
is the same thing at the drugstore, for like $10. So
Right.
really do your research before you go and like give them $500 for like a $200 job.
Exactly. Yep. And you can refer back to episode 28, where we talked about specific things to look for on a property tour that might be some red flags, and that you can just prepare yourself before you actually start looking at properties.
Yes.
And then my last tip is really don't let the market pressure you into making a decision. It is very fast paced right now. There's a low supply of homes, they're all in high demand. But if a home doesn't make sense for you for any number of reasons, whether it be your must have versus want list, financial reasons, or maybe you just show up and you get a weird vibe, don't be pressured into making an offer just because you feel like you need to be at a stage in your life where you want a house.
Mm, that's a really good point.
Mhm. So to sum up this episode, I'll just kind of go through some of these tips that we talked about and give a little bit of my experience. When I first started searching for a home, I felt incredibly lost and I really had no idea what I was doing. So by surrounding yourself with people who are knowledgeable about the process is a really precious resource. And it's so important to find a realtor that you vibe with and who does good work that fits your specific needs. And also, you will likely have several oh shit moments throughout the whole process, even after moving into your home, but know that that's normal. Like, I can't tell you how many times after I bought my first house that I was like, I've made a mistake. Everything that I've done, like, this is wrong. Like, that'll happen, but it gets better, I promise. And those things will get less scary over time, too. So I hope these tips help make the process feel slightly less overwhelming if you are searching for your first home, or if you are just searching for another home and the process never really gets like totally easy. So I hope this episode helps you feel less overwhelmed and will make you feel more confident in your decision making.
Yeah, that was amazing. That was like what I needed when I first started this.
Me
So
too.
I'm definitely so happy that you covered this, and I am just so proud that we're able to give this type of resource to people that
Yeah.
are, fresh out the gate wanting to jump into real estate. So thank you so much for compiling all this information and looking back on your whole journey too, and maybe like picking out like the best case scenarios that you've had and the worst case scenarios that
Right.
you've had as well. So, yes, great job, Lexie.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to our listeners as always. Join us next week for one more real estate episode in this real estate trend that we have going on lately. So thanks again, and we'll see you guys next Monday.
Bye.
Bye. Passive Aggressive Income was written, recorded, edited, and produced by co-hosts and creators Mims and Lexie. We truly want to thank our listeners, collaborators, friends, and family that continuously support us for all the love we receive. If you enjoy our show, please give us a glowing rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, follow us on Facebook and Instagram to see what we are up to. For any inquiries, please email passiveaggressiveincome2023@gmail.com. Episodes of Passive Aggressive Income are available wherever you listen to podcasts, so make sure to subscribe and like us on your favorite streaming platform.